我们现在社会的问题是，我们失去的是社会良心，并不是他买下这个媒体他所发声的管道。如果他是一个好的媒体，他是可以为大家发声，他可以监督政府，他可以提出各种意见，那为什么他不行买下其他媒体呢？
All right, what do you say?
Hello. I would like to make a more controversial point on the media case, is that I think media is itself, it is not only an agency to express the people's opinion. In nature, it works under a capitalism mechanism. It works under a market demand, that the news that is shown on TV every single day is actually what we want to see. So then it doesn't matter which company that dominates the market, the media industry, because what it will present to the audience is what we want to see. If we don't want to see it, then it follows the market mechanism. The demand drops, so they will not provide this sort of supply anymore.
All right, so this argument is analogous to the argument we heard about the 7-Eleven case, which is the consumers don't have to go to the 7-Eleven if the prices get too high or if the service isn't good enough, and they don't have to watch even a television station that may be owned by a large corporation.
Yes, I support that person over there. I think he made a point that the transaction was actually legal. But then in the 7-Eleven and the grocery case, I think if people say that the grocery case, they bring an identity to the community, then, okay, back to the practical question. Why don't you buy food in grocery stores? Do you go to grocery stores instead of 7-Elevens? Like, in the issue of convenience, you would still choose 7-Eleven instead of grocery stores.
Even though you might care with another part of yourself about the values connected with the local
Yes, but
identity.
Then there is a gap between what you do and what you say.
So, in fact, there is sometimes a gap, or maybe it's a tension within all of us, that we think of ourselves often both as consumers looking for the best deal for the lowest prices, and at the same time with another part of ourselves as citizens concerned about the character and the identity of neighborhoods and communities which we also care about. I want to thank everyone who joined in this very spirited part of the discussion about the 7-Eleven and about the newspapers and the media. To go back to our question, where do markets serve the public good, and where do they not belong? It seems that when we've been considering these various controversies about the role of markets, the disagreements seem always to come back to the question, what is the purpose of the good? What is the purpose of the activity? Is the purpose of a grocery store to make money? And if so, then that distinguishes it from a hospital whose purpose, Anne said, is to promote health, not to make money. But then others disagreed. They said, no, the purpose of a small grocery store may not only be to make money, it may be more than just a business, it may be a source of local community and identity. And that is not only a market question. So whether we were discussing how to allocate snow shovels after a storm, or bottled water after a typhoon, whether we were discussing the difference between ticket scalping for the May Day concert and for the train tickets and for the philosophy lecture and for the surgeon, or whether we were talking about the 7-Eleven on the one hand and television and newspapers on the other, we disagreed on all of these questions about whether market mechanisms are the appropriate ones. And the disagreements seemed all to depend on competing accounts, competing conceptions about the social and moral and civic purposes these institutions, these activities serve. What does this tell us about economics and ethics? Well, what it suggests to me is that economics is not enough to decide questions of policy and questions of law. Economic reasoning can't be separated from ethical reasoning. When economics was first invented by the classical economists, going back to Adam Smith, it was conceived as a branch, as a subfield of moral and political philosophy. Today, we often think of economics and teach economics as if it were a separate, autonomous discipline, as if market reasoning by itself could define the good society and the public good. But I think this is a mistake. But it's a mistake that we are all tempted to make for a deep reason. To connect economics with ethics requires us to engage in very difficult arguments, controversial arguments, about the meaning, the purpose of all of our social institutions and practices, whether it's teaching and learning, whether it's healthcare, whether it's military service, civic virtue, stores, television and newspapers, nuclear waste sightings. Now, we disagree deeply about how to interpret the purpose and meaning of these goods. And so there's a great temptation to conduct our public discourse in a way that avoids tangling with one another about these controversial moral and civic questions. And that, I think, is what leads us to say, well, let markets decide. Let them sort it out. They're neutral. They don't require us to have these ethical debates. But I think that's a mistake. And it's a mistake that in societies around the world has drained our public discourse of larger meaning. I think it's no accident that in almost every society today, there is a deep frustration with politics and with political parties. There's a frustration with what in many countries is a kind of intense, entrenched partisanship and a kind of public discourse that is hollowed out, empty of big questions, of ethical questions, of questions about justice and the meaning of goods and the character of a good society. And yet I think there's a great hunger for a better kind of public discourse, a public discourse that engages directly with big moral questions, including questions of justice. That kind of public discourse is not easy to achieve because it requires that we overcome our hesitation to reason together in public about these controversial moral questions. But I think it's possible. I think it's possible in part because we've been doing it this evening. You could see by the white cards and the orange cards the disagreements in this hall on each of these questions. And you could hear in the arguments across this arena the competing views about the role of markets, about what counts as human needs, about what are necessities and what are luxuries, about how to value goods, from education to the environment, to military service, to criminal justice, to civic life. And yet, if you think about the discussions we had, they not only illustrate the necessary connection between economics and ethics, they also illustrate that it is possible to enter into debates and discussions, public discussions, about hard ethical questions in a spirit of mutual respect and civility, listening to one another, sometimes learning from one another, even where we may disagree. I think the quality that you have displayed tonight is what is desperately needed in public discourse and public life. At a certain period of rising economic growth and economic development, it sometimes seems that all that matters is economics and economic efficiency, and that the law of supply and demand also defines the public good. But once a society reaches a certain stage of economic well-being and achievement, people's attention turns, and rightly turns, to the character of the society we share, the way we live together. And that brings our attention back to ancient questions about justice, what we owe one another, how to value goods, and the meaning of the good life. So, what I have heard tonight leaves me very hopeful. I know there's frustration about the terms of public discourse in your society and in mine, and in just about every other society with which I'm familiar. But what I've also heard is the yearning, the hunger for something better, the aspiration to lift up our public discourse, not because we will agree if we have a morally more robust debate about big questions, but because that kind of debate is more worthy of what we aspire to in public life. And that kind of debate deepens democracy and makes all of us better citizens. So I think this has really been, certainly for me, I hope for you, a remarkable occasion, because it was, in the end, more than a philosophy lecture, more even than a May Day concert. I think what we saw tonight, and it's thanks to you, what we saw tonight was a glimpse of what reasoned public discourse on big questions might be. Thank you all very much. Thank you. 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 Okay. Thank you. Good luck. Thank you. Thank you. Great.